The smell of garlic and rosemary filled our kitchen as I checked the oven timer. 23 years of marriage deserved more than takeout Chinese and Netflix. I'd spent the afternoon preparing Sasha's favorite, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables. The dining room table gleamed under candlelight, complete with the good china we'd received as wedding gifts and barely touched since. My phone buzzed against the granite countertop. Sasha's name lit up the screen. Dinner with clients. Don't wait. I stared at the message, my stomach dropping faster than a lead balloon. The salmon could have been cardboard for all I cared now. 23 years. And she couldn't even remember our anniversary today. Or maybe she remembered perfectly well. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The house felt too quiet suddenly. Even the evening news seemed muted, like someone had turned down the volume on my entire life. I'd taken the afternoon off from my IT consulting gig, sent my last client home early, all to surprise my wife on our special day. The irony tasted bitter. My fingers hovered over the phone keyboard. I could play it safe, send back something like, "Okay, honey, save me some leftovers." That's what the old me would have done. The me who still believed in coincidences and client dinners that ran past 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. Instead, I typed, "Enjoy the lobster. Tell Chris I want my shirt back." The response came faster than a guilty conscience. My phone rang immediately. "What the hell does that mean?" Sasha's voice cracked through the speaker, higher pitched than usual. "It means I'm not as stupid as you think I am." I walked to the window, peering through the blinds at our quiet suburban street. Mrs. Patterson was walking her ancient beagle. The Hendersons' porch light flickered like it had for months. Everything looked normal, but normal was apparently an illusion I'd been living in. "You're being paranoid, Dave. I'm at Morton's with the Kellerman account team." Funny thing about Morton's, they don't serve lobster. Silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I could practically hear her scrambling for another lie. "Look, we went to the lobster pot instead. The clients wanted seafood. You know how these things go." "Sure I do, especially when Chris drives a silver BMW and parks in the third row at the lobster pot. You know, the same Chris who left his Northwestern University t-shirt in our laundry basket last week. The one you said belonged to Emily from her college visit, except Emily goes to state." The line went dead. I set the phone down and looked at our anniversary dinner, growing cold under the warm light. 23 years of marriage, and it had come down to a text message and a borrowed shirt. The salmon looked as disappointed as I felt. My daughter Emily called an hour later, her voice cheerful against the backdrop of college party noise. "Hey, Dad, just checking in. Mom said she's working late again. You doing okay?" "Define okay." "Uh-oh, that's your sarcastic voice. What happened?" I could hear her friends laughing in the background, probably pre-gaming for whatever passed for fun on a Tuesday night in college. Emily was 21, smart as a whip, and still believed her parents had figured out this whole adult thing. "Your mom's having dinner with clients." "On your anniversary?" "Dad, that sucks. Want me to call her?" "Don't worry about it, sweetheart. How are classes going?" We talked for another 10 minutes about her psychology major and her boyfriend Trevor, who apparently played intramural soccer and worked at the campus bookstore. Normal college stuff, normal daughter stuff. I tried to sound interested, but my mind kept drifting to silver BMWs and borrowed shirts. After Emily hung up, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the ruins of my romantic gesture. The candles had burned down to waxy stubs. The salmon had gone from golden brown to something resembling cardboard. Even the wine had lost its appeal. I'd met Chris Dalton 3 years ago when he joined our IT consulting firm as a project manager. Tall, athletic, with a kind of easy charm that made clients feel like they were his best friends. He drove a BMW, wore expensive suits, and hit the gym religiously. Everything I wasn't, in other words. The first time I noticed something off was 6 months ago at the company Christmas party. Sasha had worn a red dress that hugged her curves, her blonde hair swept up in an elegant twist. She looked stunning, and I'd felt proud walking in with her on my arm. But then Chris appeared, and suddenly I might as well have been invisible. They'd talked by the punch bowl for 20 minutes, laughing at jokes I couldn't hear. When I joined them, Chris had clapped me on the shoulder like we were old buddies. "Dave, your wife was just telling me about her latest case. Sounds fascinating." Sasha had smiled, but something in her eyes looked guilty. Or maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I'd been imagining things for months. I pulled up our home security app on my phone, scrolling back through today's footage. There was Sasha leaving at 6:30, her black Mercedes pulling out of our driveway. But 3 minutes later, a silver BMW appeared at the corner. She'd walked to meet him. The old Dave would have made excuses. Traffic was bad. The client wanted to carpool, something innocent and reasonable, but the old Dave had also believed his wife when she said she was working late 4 nights a week. I grabbed my keys. The Lobster Pot sat on the edge of downtown, one of those mid-tier restaurants that tried too hard to be upscale. Red brick exterior, nautical decorations that looked like they'd been ordered from a catalog, and prices that made you feel sophisticated without breaking the bank. Perfect for impressing clients. Or conducting affairs. I parked across the street, my old Honda Civic looking shabby next to the BMWs and Mercedes in the lot. Through the large front windows, I could see couples leaning across candlelit tables, servers weaving between tables with steaming plates. It looked romantic. It looked like the kind of place I should have taken Sasha for our anniversary. Instead, she was here with Chris. I spotted them at a corner table, partially hidden behind a decorative lobster trap that had probably never seen the ocean. Sasha sat with her back to the window, her blonde hair catching the light. Chris faced her, leaning forward with that practiced smile of his. His hand rested on the table, fingers almost touching hers. My chest tightened. 23 years of marriage, and my wife was having our anniversary dinner with another man. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. The zoom wasn't great, but it was good enough to capture Chris reaching across the table to touch Sasha's hand, good enough to catch her laughing at something he said, her head thrown back in genuine delight. I hadn't seen her laugh like that in months. The photos felt like evidence in a court case I didn't want to prosecute. But I took them anyway, each click of the camera app like a nail in the coffin of my marriage. I sent the clearest photo to Sasha's phone with a simple message. Looks like a productive client meeting. Through the window, I watched her phone light up on the table. She glanced at it, and her face went white. She showed Chris the screen, and his expression shifted from smug satisfaction to panic in about 2 seconds. They both looked around the restaurant like they expected me to come bursting through the front door, but I wasn't ready for that confrontation yet. Instead, I walked to the parking lot and found Chris's BMW. The silver paint job was pristine, not a scratch or dent anywhere. The interior looked like something from a luxury car commercial. Leather seats, high-tech dashboard, everything perfectly clean. It probably cost more than I made in 6 months. I pulled out my keys and considered my options. I could key the paint, slash the tires, break a window, all satisfying in the moment, all completely stupid in the long run. Instead, I opted for something more subtle. I took my house key and carefully scratched a message into the driver's side door. Not deep enough to damage the metal underneath, but clear enough to read, "I know." Then I walked back to my car and drove home. My phone rang before I'd made it 3 blocks. "Dave, we need to talk." Sasha's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "About what? Your client dinner?" "Don't be an ass. Come home. We'll discuss this like adults." Adults don't lie about working late. Adults don't have romantic dinners with their husbands' coworkers on their wedding anniversary. It's not what you think. Really? Because what I think is that my wife is cheating on me with Chris Dalton, and tonight I got proof. The silence stretched for so long I thought she'd hung up. "I'll be home in an hour," she finally said. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." But as I pulled into our driveway, I wondered if that was really true. The house looked different somehow, like I was seeing it for the first time. The white colonial with black shutters, the perfectly manicured lawn, the flower beds Sasha had planted last spring. It had been our dream home when we'd bought it 15 years ago. Now it felt like a stage set for a play I didn't want to be in. I went inside and cleaned up the anniversary dinner I'd prepared. The salmon went into the garbage disposal, the vegetables joined it, the wine went back in the cabinet, unopened. By the time I finished, it was like the romantic evening had never happened. Just like my marriage, apparently. I was sitting in my recliner, nursing a beer and watching SportsCenter when Sasha's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. She sat in the car for a few minutes before coming inside, probably rehearsing whatever story she'd decided to tell. When she finally walked through the front door, she looked like she'd been crying. Her makeup was smudged, her hair disheveled. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen, but that part was getting smaller by the minute. "Dave, I'm sorry." "For which part? The lying, the cheating, or forgetting our anniversary?" She flinched like I'd slapped her. It's complicated." "Actually, it's pretty simple. You're having an affair with Chris. The only complicated part is figuring out how long it's been going on." She sat down on the couch across from me, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl called to the principal's office. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months. Half a year of lies, excuses, and late nights at the office. Half a year of me being the clueless husband while my wife fell in love with someone else. Why? She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Because he makes me feel alive again. Because when I'm with him, I remember who I used to be before I became just this. She gestured around our living room, at the life we'd built together. The family photos on the mantel, the furniture we'd picked out together, the throw pillows she'd insisted would bring the room together. All of it apparently just a prison she'd been desperate to escape. And what am I in all this? Just the boring husband who pays the bills? You're a good man, Dave. You deserve better than this. You're right, I do. The next morning, I woke up on the couch with a crick in my neck and the taste of betrayal in my mouth. Sasha had spent the night in our bedroom, former bedroom, I corrected myself, and I could hear her moving around upstairs, getting ready for work like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just blown up 23 years of marriage over seafood and small talk. I made coffee and checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Chris, 2 text messages asking if we could talk this through like men. The irony wasn't lost on me. Real men didn't sleep with their colleagues' wives, but apparently Chris had his own definition of masculinity. I was halfway through my first cup when Sasha came downstairs, dressed for court in her power suit and heels. She looked professional, composed, every inch the successful attorney. Only the dark circles under her eyes betrayed what had happened the night before. I'm staying at my sister's for a few days, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Give us both some time to think. Think about what? You've already made your choice. It doesn't have to end this way, Dave. We could try counseling, work through this. I almost laughed. Work through what? Your affair? Your lies? The fact that you forgot our anniversary to have dinner with your boyfriend? She set her coffee mug on the counter with more force than necessary. Fine. Be bitter. But don't pretend you're the perfect husband. When's the last time you surprised me? When's the last time you made me feel special? I tried to surprise you last night, remember? With dinner, candles, the whole romantic gesture. You were too busy screwing around to notice. That's not what I mean, and you know it. No, I don't know it. Explain it to me, Sasha. Explain how this is my fault. She grabbed her purse and briefcase, her movements sharp and angry. Forget it. I'll call you later. Don't bother. I'll be at work, earning money to pay for the house you're abandoning. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. I finished my coffee in the sudden quiet of the empty house. 23 years of marriage, and it had taken less than 12 hours to fall apart. The speed of it was almost impressive in a catastrophic sort of way. My phone buzzed. A text from my boss, Jim Morrison. Not the rock star, a 60-year-old former Marine who ran our IT consulting firm with military precision and a surprisingly dirty sense of humor. Heard about the drama. You okay? Word traveled fast in a small company. Chris had probably called in sick, claiming food poisoning or a family emergency. Anything to avoid facing me at the office. I texted back, Define okay? Come in when you're ready. We'll talk. I showered, dressed, and drove to work in a daze. Our office occupied the second floor of a converted warehouse downtown, all exposed brick and industrial lighting that was supposed to look hip and modern. We had 12 employees, including Chris and me, handling IT projects for local businesses and the occasional corporate client. Jim was waiting in his office when I arrived, a cup of coffee growing cold on his desk. He looked up when I knocked on his door frame. Dave, come in, shut the door. I sat down in the chair across from his desk, feeling like a kid called to the principal's office for the second time in 12 hours. Chris called in sick today, Jim said without preamble. Food poisoning, he claims. Funny thing is, food poisoning doesn't usually leave scratches on your car door. You saw his BMW? Hard to miss. I know, scratched right into the paint, subtle as a brick through a window. Jim leaned back in his chair, studying me with sharp eyes. Want to tell me what's going on? My wife's been having an affair with Chris for 6 months. I found out last night. Jim nodded like this confirmed something he'd already suspected. Figured it was something like that. The way they acted at the Christmas party, all the whispered conversations in the break room. Hell, even the cleaning lady noticed. Everyone knew but me? People suspected. Nobody wanted to be the one to tell you. He paused, then added, For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Sasha seemed like good people. Seemed being the operative phrase. What do you want to do about Chris? It was a loaded question. Jim was asking if I wanted Chris fired, transferred, or just kept on separate projects. But he was also asking something deeper. What kind of man was I going to be in the aftermath of this betrayal? I want to handle it myself. Nothing illegal, nothing that'll get the company sued. Nothing illegal, I agreed. Jim studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Chris is scheduled to come back tomorrow. Try not to kill him in the office. Bad for morale. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on code reviews and client updates, but my mind kept drifting to silver BMWs and borrowed t-shirts. By 5 o'clock, I'd accomplished approximately nothing and felt like I'd run a marathon. I was packing up my laptop when Sarah Chen, one of our junior developers, knocked on my cubicle wall. "Hey Dave, you okay? You seem distracted today." Sarah was 26, brilliant with databases, and had the kind of directness that came from growing up as the only daughter of immigrant parents who expected excellence. She also had a crush on Chris that she thought she was hiding better than she actually was. "Just working through some personal stuff. Anything I can help with?" I looked at her earnest face and felt a stab of sympathy. She had no idea that the man she'd been making eyes at for months was a lying, cheating bastard who'd destroyed my marriage. "Actually, yeah. Stay away from Chris Dalton. He's not the man you think he is." Her face flushed red. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you do. And I'm telling you, as someone who's learned the hard way, Chris only cares about Chris. Don't waste your time." I left her standing there, mouth open, probably wondering what had gotten into me. But if I could save one person from Chris's particular brand of charm, maybe something good would come out of this mess. I drove home through streets that looked familiar but felt foreign, like I was seeing my own life from the outside. The house was dark and empty, exactly as I'd left it that morning. Sasha's absence filled the rooms like smoke, making everything feel hollow and temporary. I ordered pizza and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, washing it down with beer and self-pity. This was my life now, take-out dinners and empty houses, the debris of a marriage that had imploded faster than a controlled demolition. My phone rang at 9 p.m. Emily's name lit up the screen. "Dad? Mom called me. She said you two are having some problems." That's one way to put it. "She's staying at Aunt Linda's." She sounded really upset. Of course she did. The victim in her own story, the misunderstood wife whose husband couldn't appreciate her needs. I wondered what version of events Sasha had shared with her sister and daughter. "Your mom and I are working through some things, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." "Are you getting divorced?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Divorced. The word I'd been avoiding all day, the reality I wasn't ready to face. "I don't know yet." "I'm sorry, Dad. This really sucks." "Yeah, it does." We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important, both of us dancing around the elephant in the room. Emily was smart enough to know there was more to the story, but she was also 21 and dealing with her own life 300 miles away. She didn't need the gory details of her parents' failing marriage. After she hung up, I sat in my recliner and stared at the family photos on the mantel. 23 years of birthdays, anniversaries, vacations, and holidays. All of it reduced to evidence in the case of a marriage gone wrong. But as I sat there in the dark, nursing my beer and my wounded pride, something else began to grow alongside the hurt. Something harder and sharper than self-pity. Anger. Chris thought he could take my wife, destroy my marriage, and face no consequences beyond some scratches on his car door. Sasha thought she could lie to me for 6 months, forget our anniversary, and then blame me for not being romantic enough. They were both about to learn how wrong they were. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sasha laughing at Chris's jokes, her hand in his across that candlelit table. By 4 a.m., I gave up pretending and made coffee, sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. If Sasha wanted to play games, I'd play games, but I'd play to win. I started with what I knew. 6 months of lies, a pattern of late nights and weekend emergencies, Chris's Northwestern t-shirt in my laundry basket. Then I added what I could prove, the photos from the lobster pot, the security footage of the meeting on the corner, credit card statements I could access online. Sasha was a lawyer, which meant she was smart, careful, and used to thinking 3 steps ahead. But she was also arrogant, convinced that her boring IT husband would never be clever enough to catch her in a lie. That arrogance would be her downfall. Chris was easier. He was vain, shallow, and stupid enough to think with his dick instead of his brain. He'd make mistakes, leave evidence, probably brag to his gym buddies about his conquest. All I had to do was wait for him to hang himself. I was on my 2nd cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. A text from Chris. "Dave, we need to talk. This doesn't have to get ugly." I stared at the message, amazed by his audacity. He'd been screwing my wife for 6 months, and he was worried about things getting ugly. I typed back, "You're right. It doesn't have to get ugly. It's going to get ugly." His response came immediately. "Don't do anything stupid." "Stupid like sleeping with your colleague's wife? That kind of stupid?" He didn't text back. I finished my coffee and got ready for work, choosing my clothes carefully. Dark jeans, button-down shirt, casual but professional. I wanted to look like a man in control, not a victim. The office was buzzing with barely contained gossip when I arrived. Conversation stopped when I walked past, then resumed in whispers. Sarah Chen avoided eye contact. Even the receptionist seemed nervous. Jim was waiting by my cubicle with 2 cups of coffee and a grim expression. Chris called in sick again. Stomach bug, he claims. Funny how stomach bugs always seem to coincide with guilty consciences. You talked to him? He texted me this morning. Wanted to talk things through. Jim snorted. I bet he did. Probably wants to explain how it's all a big misunderstanding. Something like that. We stood there for a moment, drinking coffee and watching our coworkers pretend they weren't listening to every word. You know, Jim said finally, Chris has been pretty careless with his expense reports lately, claiming dinners with clients that don't match up with his calendar might be worth an audit. I looked at my boss, seeing the glint in his eyes. Jim Morrison might have been a straight-laced former Marine, but he had 0 tolerance for liars and cheaters. That sounds like a good idea. I'll have accounting pull his records. Purely routine, you understand? Of course. Jim walked away, leaving me with a small smile on my face. Chris thought he was so clever, using company money to wine and dine my wife, but every restaurant receipt was evidence. Every phony expense report another nail in his coffin. I spent the morning diving into work, actually accomplishing something for the first time in days. It felt good to focus on problems I could solve, code that would do exactly what I told it to do. Unlike wives and marriages, computers were logical, predictable, honest. At lunch, I drove to the gym where Chris worked out. It was one of those upscale fitness centers with juice bars and personal trainers, the kind of place where people went to be seen as much as to exercise. Chris's BMW was in the parking lot, which meant he wasn't as sick as he'd claimed. I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in my car and waited. Sure enough, Chris emerged an hour later, his hair still damp from the shower, gym bag slung over his shoulder. He looked healthy as a horse for someone with a stomach bug. I followed him to his apartment complex, a trendy development with names like The Residences at Somewhere Pretentious. Chris lived in a corner unit on the 3rd floor with a balcony overlooking the complex's pool. I'd been there once for a company barbecue, back when I thought Chris was just an overly friendly coworker. I parked across the street and watched Chris disappear into his building. Then I called his office number. Chris Dalton's office. This is Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. This is Dave from IT. Is Chris available? I have some questions about the Morrison account. Oh, I'm sorry, Dave. Chris called in sick today. Food poisoning, I think. Can I take a message? Actually, I just saw him at the gym. Maybe he's feeling better? Silence on the other end of the line. I'm sure there's some mistake. I'm sure there is. Thanks, Jennifer. I hung up and made a note on my legal pad. Chris Dalton, caught in a lie by his own secretary. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That evening, I drove to Linda's house to confront Sasha. My sister-in-law lived in a subdivision that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never seen a real neighborhood, all winding streets and houses that looked identical except for the color of their shutters. Sasha's Mercedes was in Linda's driveway, looking as out of place as I felt. I sat in my car for a few minutes, gathering my courage. Then I walked to the front door and rang the bell. Linda answered, her face carefully neutral. She was 5 years younger than Sasha, divorced, with 2 teenage kids who treated her house like a hotel. She'd never liked me much, always thought her sister had settled for less than she deserved. Dave, Sasha said you might come by. I need to talk to my wife. I don't think that's a good idea right now. She's pretty upset. She's upset? That's rich. Linda's expression hardened. Look, I know you're hurt, but nothing. Get Sasha, or I'll stand here ringing your doorbell until your neighbors call the cops. She stared at me for a moment, probably seeing something in my face that made her reconsider. Then she stepped aside. She's in the kitchen. I found Sasha sitting at Linda's breakfast table, a glass of wine in her hand, and tissues scattered around her like fallen snow. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red and puffy from crying. Dave, I didn't expect you. We need to talk. I told you, I need time to think. Time to think about what? Whether you want to keep screwing Chris or find someone new? She flinched. That's not fair. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about 23 years of marriage. Let's talk about the anniversary dinner I made while you were out with your boyfriend. Let's talk about fair. Linda appeared in the doorway, probably drawn by the sound of raised voices. Maybe you two should do this somewhere else. Maybe you should mind your own business, I snapped. Sasha stood up, her chair scraping against the tile floor. Don't talk to my sister like that. Your sister who's been covering for your affair? The sister who probably knew about Chris before I did? Linda's face went pale, which was answer enough. I thought so. I turned back to Sasha. How many people knew? How many people were laughing at the stupid husband while you played house with Chris? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Explain it to me, Sasha. Help me understand how 6 months of lies and betrayal is somehow my fault. She sat back down, her hands shaking as she reached for her wine glass. You want the truth? Fine. I was lonely, Dave. Lonely in my own marriage. When's the last time we talked about anything besides bills and schedules? When's the last time you looked at me like I was more than just the woman who does your laundry? So you decided to find someone who would? Chris makes me feel alive. When I'm with him, I remember who I used to be. Who you used to be. You used to be my wife. You used to be Emily's mother. You used to be someone who kept her promises. Tears started flowing down her cheeks again. I never meant for this to happen. But it did happen. For 6 months, it happened. Every lie, every excuse, every time you came home smelling like his cologne, it all happened. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos from the lobster pot. This happened too, on our anniversary, while I was home cooking dinner and lighting candles like some kind of romantic fool. She stared at the photos, her face crumbling. Dave, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, Sasha. Sorry doesn't give me back 6 months of marriage. Sorry doesn't make me forget that my wife chose another man over me. I stood up, suddenly exhausted. The anger that had carried me through the day was fading, replaced by something deeper and more permanent. Not hurt, I was past hurt. This was something colder, harder. I want you to move out. Permanently. Dave, please. We can work through this. No, we can't. This isn't a rough patch, Sasha. This isn't a midlife crisis or a moment of weakness. This is who you are now. Someone who lies to her husband, forgets her anniversary, and blames everyone else for her choices. I walked toward the door, then turned back. Oh, and tell Chris his expense account is being audited. Turns out the company frowns on employees using corporate credit cards to finance their affairs. Sasha's face went white. Dave, don't do this. Don't destroy his career over this. I'm not destroying anything. Chris did that himself when he decided to screw his colleague's wife on the company's dime. I left her sitting there, crying into her wine while Linda tried to comfort her. Let them console each other. I had work to do. The next morning, Chris finally returned to work. I watched him park his scratched BMW and walk into the building, his usual swagger replaced by something that looked almost like shame. Almost, but not quite. He avoided me all morning, taking meetings in conference rooms, eating lunch at his desk, but eventually he had to use the bathroom, and I was waiting when he came out. Dave? He tried to smile, but it came out looking more like a grimace. How are you holding up? Better than expected? You? Look, about Sasha. What about her? He glanced around the hallway, making sure we were alone. It just happened, man. Neither of us planned it. 6 months of just happening. That's got to be some kind of record. I know you're angry. Angry? I laughed, and the sound made him take a step back. Chris, I'm not angry. Angry is what you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic. This is something else entirely. What do you want? You want me to quit? Transfer to another office? What I want is for you to understand that actions have consequences. You made a choice. Now you get to live with the results. His face hardened. Are you threatening me? I'm promising you. Every lie you told, every receipt you faked, every time you looked me in the eye and pretended to be my friend while you were screwing my wife, it's all going to come back to you. You can't prove anything, I smiled. Want to bet? That afternoon, Jim called Chris into his office. Through the glass walls, I watched Chris's face go from confident to worried to panicked as Jim laid out the expense account discrepancies. Restaurant receipts that didn't match his calendar. Hotel charges in cities where he had no business meetings. Credit card statements that painted a very clear picture of a man using company money to finance an extramarital affair. Chris tried to explain, gesturing wildly with his hands. Jim listened with the patience of a man who'd heard every excuse in the book during his 20 years in the Marines. When Chris finished talking, Jim said something that made Chris's shoulders slump in defeat. The meeting lasted an hour. When Chris finally emerged, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. He cleaned out his desk without making eye contact with anyone, packed his personal items in a cardboard box, and walked out of our office for the last time. Sarah Chen appeared at my cubicle 10 minutes later, her eyes wide with shock. What happened to Chris? He got caught lying on his expense reports. That's it? They fired him for fudging expenses? They fired him for using company money to conduct an affair with a married woman. The lying was just the cherry on top. She stared at me, processing this information. The married woman? Is it someone I know? It's my wife. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, Dave, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry for me. Be smart for yourself. Chris is exactly the kind of man who would use company money to wine and dine someone else's wife, then act surprised when there are consequences. She nodded, her crush on Chris evaporating in real time. Is there anything I can do? Yeah. Don't ever trust a man who's too charming. The good ones don't need to work that hard to impress you. That evening, I drove to Chris's apartment complex. His BMW was gone, but I knew he'd be back eventually. I parked across the street and waited, thinking about consequences and justice and the satisfying weight of a plan coming together. Chris returned at 8 p.m. driving a rental car. His BMW was probably at the body shop getting the scratches buffed out. He parked in his assigned spot and sat in the car for a few minutes, probably working up the courage to face his empty apartment and uncertain future. I waited until he was inside, then I called his landlord. The Residences at Somewhere Pretentious was owned by a local real estate company that prided itself on maintaining high standards for its tenants. Professional people only. No criminals, no troublemakers, no one who might damage their reputation. Hi, this is Dave Patterson. I'm calling about one of your tenants, Chris Dalton, in Unit 314. Is there a problem, Mr. Patterson? I hope not. I just thought you should know that Mr. Dalton was fired today for using his company credit card to conduct an extramarital affair. I'm not sure if that affects his lease agreement, but I thought you'd want to be aware. There was a pause. Are you certain about this information? Completely certain. I work for the same company. Worked, in Chris's case. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll look into it. I hung up and smiled. The Residences at Somewhere Pretentious had a morality clause in their lease agreements. I'd read it carefully during that company barbecue, amused by their attempt to legislate respectability. Now that clause was going to bite Chris in his perfectly toned ass. And my phone rang as I was driving home, Sasha's name on the screen. Dave, what did you do? I'm going to need you to be more specific. Chris lost his job today. His landlord called him tonight, said they're reviewing his lease. What did you do? I told the truth. Chris used company money to finance your affair. His landlord deserved to know what kind of tenant they were dealing with. You're destroying his life. No, Sasha. Chris destroyed his own life when he decided to sleep with his colleague's wife. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it. This isn't you, Dave. This vindictive, cruel person. This isn't who you are. You're right. The old Dave would have suffered in silence, maybe gone to counseling, definitely blamed himself for not being a better husband, but the old Dave didn't know his wife was a cheating liar. The new Dave is still figuring out who he wants to be. She was crying now, her sobs echoing through the phone. Please, Dave. Chris is sorry. I'm sorry. We both made mistakes, but destroying his career isn't going to fix our marriage. Our marriage is over, Sasha. It ended the night you chose to have anniversary dinner with another man. Everything that happens now is just paperwork. I don't want a divorce. Then you shouldn't have had an affair. I hung up and turned off my phone. Let her call back a dozen times. Let her leave tearful voicemails and send desperate text messages. I was done being the understanding husband, the reasonable man who put everyone else's needs ahead of his own. For 23 years, I'd been the steady one, the reliable one, the one who fixed problems and kept the peace. I'd worked long hours to pay for the house Sasha wanted, the car she needed, the lifestyle she deserved. I'd been a good husband, a good father, a good man. And where had it gotten me? Alone in an empty house, eating takeout dinners while my wife played house with a man who thought expense account fraud was an acceptable dating strategy. Well, no more. If Sasha wanted to see what vindictive looked like, I'd show her vindictive. If Chris thought he could destroy my marriage without consequences, he was about to learn otherwise. I was done being the victim in this story. It was time to become something else entirely. The question was, how far was I willing to go? As I pulled into my driveway and looked at the dark, empty house that used to be my home, I realized I was about to find out. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in my lawyer's office, signing divorce papers and listening to Margaret Henley explain how California's no-fault divorce laws would affect the division of our assets. Margaret was 60, sharp as a razor, and had been handling messy divorces for 30 years. She'd seen every kind of betrayal, every variety of human weakness, and nothing surprised her anymore. The house will need to be sold, she was saying, unless one of you wants to buy out the other's share. Given your respective incomes, that seems unlikely. Sell it, I said. I don't want to live there anymore anyway. What about the retirement accounts? Split them down the middle. I want this over with. Margaret looked at me over her reading glasses. You know, most men in your situation try to fight for every penny. They want to punish their wives financially. I'm not most men. No, you're not. She made a note on her legal pad. Your wife's attorney says she's willing to accept your terms. No alimony, 50-50 split of assets, joint custody of your daughter, even though Emily's over 18. Good. There is one more thing. Margaret pulled out a manila folder and slid it across her desk. I had my investigator do some digging into Chris Dalton's background. You might find this interesting. I opened the folder and started reading. Chris's employment history, credit report, and something that made me sit up straighter. A restraining order filed by his ex-girlfriend in Phoenix 2 years ago. Stalking and harassment, Margaret said. The charges were dropped when he agreed to move out of state, but the pattern is there. Your wife might want to be careful. I closed the folder and handed it back. Not my problem anymore. You're not going to warn her? Sasha made her choice. She can live with the consequences. But as I drove home from the lawyer's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Chris had been too quiet lately, too accepting of his fate. Men like him didn't just disappear into the night. They plotted comebacks, nursed grudges, looked for someone else to blame for their problems. My phone rang as I was pulling into my driveway. Emily's name on the screen. Dad? I just talked to Mom. She said the divorce papers are signed. That's right, sweetheart. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted. Sometimes what we want and what we get are two different things. Are you okay? You sound different. Different. That was one way to put it. The old Dave would have been devastated, broken, probably drinking too much and feeling sorry for himself. The new Dave was something else entirely. Harder, colder, more focused. I'm fine, Emily. Better than fine, actually. Mom's really upset. She's staying with Aunt Linda indefinitely. Your mother made her choices. Now she gets to live with them. Dad, that's kind of harsh. The truth usually is. We talked for a few more minutes about her classes, her boyfriend Trevor, her plans for spring break. Normal father-daughter conversation, except nothing felt normal anymore. I was playing a role, pretending to be the same man I'd been a month ago. But that man was gone, replaced by someone I was still getting to know. After Emily hung up, I sat in my car and looked at the house I'd called home for 15 years. The for sale sign would go up next week. By summer, some other family would be living here, making their own memories, building their own version of happily ever after. I hoped they'd have better luck than I had. That evening, I drove to the Rusty Hook, a dive bar on the wrong side of town where nobody knew my name or cared about my problems. It was the kind of place where men went to drink away their failures, nurse their grudges, and pretend they were tougher than their circumstances. I was nursing my second beer when Chris Dalton walked in. He looked like hell. His usually perfect hair was unkempt, his expensive clothes replaced by jeans and a t-shirt that had seen better days. He'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and too much alcohol. He spotted me immediately and walked over, swaying slightly, drunk but not completely gone. Dave fucking Patterson, he slurred, sliding into the booth across from me. The man who destroyed my life. You destroyed your own life, Chris. I just made sure everyone knew about it. You cost me my job, my apartment, my fucking life. You cost yourself all of that when you decided to sleep with my wife. He leaned across the table, his breath reeking of whiskey and desperation. You think you won? You think ruining my life makes you some kind of hero? I don't think I'm a hero. I know I'm not a victim anymore. Sasha doesn't want you back, you know. Even after everything that's happened, she still calls me, still wants to see me. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Is that right? That's right. She feels sorry for you, Dave. Guilty about the way things ended. But she doesn't love you. She loves me. He was lying. He had to be lying. But something in his eyes, some gleam of satisfaction, made me wonder if he was telling the truth. Even if that's true, I said carefully, it doesn't matter. The divorce papers are signed. Sasha can do whatever she wants. You're right, she can. Chris smiled, and it was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen. And what she wants is me. Damaged goods and all. He stood up, swaying slightly. Thanks for the chat, Dave. See you around. I watched him stumble toward the door, his words echoing in my head. Sasha was still seeing him, still choosing him, even after everything that had happened. The betrayal I thought was over was still ongoing, just more carefully hidden. I finished my beer and drove home, my mind racing. If Chris was telling the truth, then Sasha had learned nothing from the last month. She was still the same woman who'd forgotten our anniversary to have dinner with her lover. Still the same woman who'd lied to my face for 6 months. Still the woman who'd chosen someone else over me. I parked in my driveway and sat in the dark, thinking about justice and revenge and the difference between the two. Then I pulled out my phone and made a call. "Margaret, it's Dave Patterson. I need you to do something for me." "It's 10 o'clock at night, Dave." "I know. This can't wait. I need you to have your investigator follow Sasha. I have reason to believe she's still seeing Chris Dalton." There was a pause. "Dave, the divorce is final. What your ex-wife does now is her business. Not if she's lying about it. Not if she's planning to get back together with him after the dust settles. What difference does it make?" "It makes all the difference in the world," Margaret sighed. "I'll make some calls. But Dave, be careful. Revenge has a way of consuming the people who pursue it." "I'm not pursuing revenge, Margaret. I'm pursuing justice. Sometimes they're the same thing." I hung up and walked into my empty house, turning on lights that seemed dimmer than they used to be. The rooms felt hollow, like a stage set after the play had ended. But this play wasn't over yet. There was still one more act to go, and I intended to make it a memorable one. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. I showered, dressed carefully, and drove to work with something approaching enthusiasm. Jim was waiting by my cubicle with coffee and a knowing look. "You look better," he said. "I feel better." "Hear from Chris lately?" "As a matter of fact, I did. He's still in town, still making poor life choices. Some people never learn." "No, they don't. But that's okay. It makes them predictable." Jim studied my face, probably seeing something there that made him curious. "You planning something, Dave?" "I'm planning lots of things, most of them legal." "Most of them," I smiled. "All of them, Jim. I'm not stupid." "No, you're not. You're something else entirely these days." He was right. I was something else entirely. The question was, what exactly was I becoming? I spent the day working on code, fixing problems, making things function the way they were supposed to. It was satisfying work, logical, and clean. Unlike human relationships, computer programs did exactly what you told them to do. At lunch, I drove to the Lobster Pot and sat in the same corner booth where Sasha and Chris had their anniversary dinner. The irony wasn't lost on me. A month ago, I'd been the cuckolded husband, taking pictures through the window like some kind of private detective. Now I was the one inside, planning my next move. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret's investigator. "Target acquired, sending photos." The photos showed Sasha and Chris at a coffee shop across town, holding hands across a small table. She was crying. He was talking earnestly, both of them looking like star-crossed lovers in a bad romance novel. So Chris had been telling the truth. Sasha was still seeing him, still choosing him over the wreckage of our marriage. Even after losing his job, his apartment, his reputation, she was still willing to bet her future on a man who'd proven he couldn't be trusted. I stared at the photos for a long time, feeling something settle into place inside me. Not anger this time, something colder and more permanent, a kind of clarity I'd never experienced before. Sasha had made her choice. Again. Despite everything that had happened, despite all the pain and betrayal and consequences, she was still choosing Chris over everyone else in her life. Over me, over Emily, over her own self-respect. Fine. If that's what she wanted, that's what she'd get. I paid for my lunch and drove to the hardware store, making a list in my head. I had work to do, and not much time to do it. But that was okay. The best plans were often the simplest ones, and my plan was very simple indeed. The annual Riverside Community Block Party was scheduled for the first Saturday in June, a tradition that brought together all the neighborhoods in our little suburb for food, games, and the kind of forced socializing that made suburbanites feel connected to something larger than their individual lives. I'd been planning for this day for 3 weeks. The block party was held in Riverside Park, a sprawling green space in the center of town with picnic areas, a small stage for local bands, and enough open space for the kind of community gathering that looked good in the local newspaper. Everyone would be there, neighbors, co-workers, local business owners, the mayor, even the high school marching band. Perfect for what I had in mind. I arrived early, helping to set up tables and hang banners like the good community member I'd always been. People were friendly but careful around me, the way they always were around the recently divorced. They'd heard the rumors, of course. Small towns thrived on gossip, and my situation had provided months of entertainment. "Dave," called out Mrs. Henderson, my next-door neighbor. "How are you holding up, dear?" "Better than expected, Mrs. Henderson. Thanks for asking. Such a shame about you and Sasha. 23 years of marriage, and then, well, these things happen, I suppose." "They certainly do." She patted my arm sympathetically and moved on to spread her concern elsewhere. I continued setting up tables, checking my watch, waiting for the right moment. At 2 o'clock, the crowd was at its peak. Families spread out on blankets, kids ran between the picnic tables, teenagers clustered around the food trucks. The local band was taking a break, which meant the small stage was empty and available. Perfect timing. I walked to the stage and picked up the microphone, tapping it to make sure it was working. The feedback screech got everyone's attention. "Sorry about that," I said, smiling at the crowd. "I just wanted to take a minute to thank everyone for being such great neighbors and friends during a difficult time in my life." A few people applauded politely. I could see familiar faces in the crowd, co-workers from the IT firm, neighbors from my street, parents from Emily's old high school, even Jim Morrison standing near the beer tent with his arms crossed. As most of you know, my wife Sasha and I recently got divorced. It's been a challenging few months, but I've learned some valuable lessons about truth, loyalty, and the importance of keeping your promises. The crowd was listening now, sensing something in my tone that went beyond the usual divorced dad-seeking sympathy routine. I've also learned some interesting things about the people in my life. For instance, I learned that my wife had been having an affair for 6 months with a coworker of mine named Chris Dalton. Some of you might remember Chris from last year's block party. Tall, good-looking guy, drove a silver BMW. Very charming. A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't the usual block party entertainment. Now, I know what you're thinking. "Dave, why are you airing your dirty laundry at a community event?" That's a fair question. The answer is simple, because some people only learn from public consequences. I pulled out my phone and held it up. See, I recently discovered that my ex-wife is still seeing Chris, even after he lost his job for using company money to finance their affair, even after he was evicted from his apartment for violating his lease agreement, even after I provided her with evidence that he has a history of stalking and harassing his ex-girlfriends. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the kids had stopped running around. But here's the thing about truth, I continued, warming to my theme. It has a way of coming out, whether you want it to or not. And the truth about Sasha and Chris is that they deserve each other. They're both liars, both cheaters, both willing to destroy other people's lives to get what they want. I spotted Sasha near the back of the crowd, her face white with shock. She was with Linda, who was pulling on her arm, trying to get her to leave. But Sasha seemed frozen in place, unable to look away from the train wreck happening on stage. "So here's what I want everyone to know," I said, looking directly at my ex-wife. Sasha Mitchell, now that she's gone back to her maiden name, is the kind of woman who forgets her wedding anniversary to have dinner with her lover. She's the kind of woman who lies to her husband's face for 6 months while conducting an affair with his coworker. She's the kind of woman who blames everyone else for her choices, then makes the same mistakes over and over again. The silence was deafening. I could see people looking around, trying to spot Sasha in the crowd, wanting to see her reaction to this public humiliation. And Chris Dalton is the kind of man who uses company money to wine and dine his colleague's wife. He's the kind of man who lies to his boss, his landlord, and his friends to cover up his affairs. He's the kind of man who has a restraining order in his past and a pattern of harassment in his future. I paused, letting that sink in. But you know what? I'm grateful to both of them, because they taught me something important about myself. They taught me that I don't have to be the victim in this story. I don't have to be the understanding husband who suffers in silence while his wife destroys their marriage. I can choose to be something else entirely. I looked out at the crowd, seeing shock, fascination, and more than a little fear in their faces. I can choose to be the man who fights back, the man who makes sure there are consequences for betrayal, the man who refuses to let liars and cheaters win. I set the microphone back on its stand and walked off the stage, leaving behind a crowd of stunned neighbors and one ex-wife who finally understood what she'd unleashed when she chose Chris Dalton over 23 years of marriage. As I walked toward my car, I could hear the murmur of voices behind me, people discussing what they'd just witnessed. Some would be scandalized, others entertained, most just grateful that the drama was happening to someone else. Jim Morrison caught up with me in the parking lot. "Jesus Christ, Dave, that was necessary," I finished. "That was brutal. You just destroyed your ex-wife's reputation in front of half the town." She destroyed it herself when she decided to keep seeing Chris after the divorce. I just made sure everyone knew about it. Jim studied my face, probably wondering if he still knew the man he'd hired 5 years ago. "You feel better now?" I considered the question. Did I feel better? Sasha would have to face every one of these people again, knowing they'd all heard the truth about her affair. She'd have to deal with the whispers, the sideways glances, the knowledge that her private shame was now public knowledge. Chris would have an even harder time. His name was now permanently associated with expense account fraud and stalking charges. Good luck finding another job in this town, or any town where people bothered to do background checks. Yeah, I said finally. I do feel better. What happens now? Now I sell the house, move somewhere new, and start over. Clean slate, fresh beginning, all that. And Sasha? I looked back toward the park, where the crowd was slowly dispersing, people heading home with a story they'd be telling for years. Sasha gets exactly what she chose. A relationship with a man who lies, cheats, and uses other people to get what he wants. She gets to find out what it's like to be with someone who has no job, no money, and no prospects. She gets to discover whether love really conquers all, or if it just makes you stupid enough to think it does. Jim shook his head. Remind me never to get on your bad side. You won't. You're not the kind of man who sleeps with his colleague's wife. I got in my car and drove home, leaving behind the wreckage of my old life and the people who'd thought they could betray me without consequences. The house felt different when I walked inside, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. My phone was buzzing with text messages and voicemails, but I ignored them all. I'd said everything I needed to say. The rest was just cleanup. I poured myself a beer and sat in my backyard, looking at the garden Sasha had planted last spring. The flowers were still blooming, bright splashes of color against the green lawn. They'd keep blooming long after she was gone, long after I'd moved away and started my new life. That was the thing about consequences. They lasted longer than the actions that caused them. Sasha would carry the shame of this day for years, maybe forever. Every time she met someone new, she'd wonder if they'd heard the story. Every time she applied for a job or tried to make friends, she'd remember the afternoon her ex-husband told an entire community exactly what kind of woman she really was. And Chris? Chris would discover that reputation was like virginity. Once you lost it, you could never get it back. He'd find out what it was like to be the man everyone knew was a liar and a cheat, the man nobody trusted with their wives or their business. They'd both learn, eventually, that actions have consequences. That betrayal comes with a price, that some people fight back when you try to destroy their lives. My phone rang. Emily's name on the screen. Dad? What the hell happened at the block party? Mom just called me crying. She said you humiliated her in front of everyone. I told the truth about her affair. In public? At a community event? Sometimes the truth needs to be public, Emily. Sometimes it's the only way to make sure there are real consequences. This isn't like you, Dad. The man who raised me wouldn't have done something so cruel. The man who raised you wouldn't have had his wife cheat on him for 6 months, then continue the affair after their divorce. People change, sweetheart. Circumstances change them. There was a long pause. When Emily spoke again, her voice was quieter, more thoughtful. Are you okay? Really okay? I'm better than okay. For the first time in months, I feel like myself again. And what happens now? Now your mother learns to live with the consequences of her choices, and I learn to live with mine. After Emily hung up, I sat in the gathering dusk and thought about the man I'd been a year ago. Trusting, loyal, willing to believe the best about people even when the evidence suggested otherwise. That man was gone, replaced by someone harder, smarter, less willing to be anyone's victim. Some people might call what I'd done cruel. Others might call it justice. I called it necessary. Sasha had made her choice when she decided to forget our anniversary for dinner with Chris. She'd made it again when she lied to my face for 6 months. She'd made it a third time when she continued seeing him after our divorce, proving that she'd learned nothing from the destruction of our marriage. Well, now she'd learned something. Now they both had. The sun set behind the trees in my backyard, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Tomorrow I'd start packing, preparing for the move to whatever came next. But tonight, I was content to sit in the ruins of my old life and appreciate the view. After all, I'd earned it.